Test 1, 2, 3. Welcome to Supplier Diversity and Inclusion, how gender inclusive sourcing can advance public policy. I'm Michael Tobolsky, Vice President of Member Development with WeConnect International, and along with me today is Brittany Gonzalez, Membership Relationship and Supplier Inclusion Manager, also with WeConnect International. And we are subject matter experts, so we're happy to be with you today to share this information on gender inclusive sourcing and how and where to get started. So today's agenda is to give you an overview of WeConnect International, our organization. Supplier diversity and inclusion, what does it mean? How to start, next steps, long-term planning, and how to engage your organization. Our mission at WeConnect International as a corporate-led organization is really to support women and have a positive impact by including them in opportunities for inclusive sourcing. A vision in terms of a world where women have the same opportunities as men to design and implement business solutions and create wealth and create sustainable communities. Our organization today has over 15,000 women businesses in it on a platform that works in 10 languages. We serve over 130 countries. We have over 160 member buyers in some of the largest organizations in the world, and they represent over 1 trillion in annual purchasing power. So our organization as a corporate-led group empowers women businesses by enabling them to compete in the global marketplace. And we're the only organization that works around the world to identify, train, and certify women-owned businesses. We support the women businesses also in capacity development and training in over 130 countries. We help our members create and implement global inclusive sourcing strategies. And we connect the member buyers with the women-owned businesses through our platform, through matchmaking events, and through conferences. And we also work and focus on building the capacity of women businesses to succeed in accessing markets and connect the women businesses with one another. Our goal is really, again, to create the opportunity for the women businesses to participate in those opportunities around the globe. Here's a listing of our current members. As I mentioned, we have over 160 today. We have some of the largest corporations in the world working with us, along with organizations such as the IMF, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the United Nations. They are all focused on some level of looking to include women businesses in their supply chains. Last year, they reported spending over $4 billion US with women businesses outside of the US. So the course goal is to provide public procurement policymakers with a strategy for gender inclusive sourcing that will lead to a finite impact. So training outcomes, number 1, is develop the business case and become an activator of change. 2, apply best practices. 3, work as a team to engage appropriate women-owned businesses for inclusion and increased impact. So now I'd like to turn it over to Brittany Gonzalez. Brittany?
Thank you, Michael. So my name is Brittany Gonzalez, and today I will be reviewing Supplier Diversity and Inclusion Demystified. So first, we'll start with the definition of supplier diversity and inclusion. The definition is on the screen, but supplier diversity and inclusion is the proactive act of buying from underutilized companies by organizations. And this supports the business strategy to drive revenue and impact. And it also makes sure that the suppliers that you use in your supply chain reflect the diverse communities of the buying organization. Next, we will go over the House of Responsible Sourcing. So historically, diversity and sustainability efforts have been managed separately in many organizations. However, leading companies are now starting to bring the two together under the roof of responsible sourcing. So let's start at the foundation. The foundation is global corporate spend or global spend in general. And these are the goods and services that a company purchases globally to run the business and deliver products and services to their customers. Next, we have the supply management software. Companies use this software to increase supply chain visibility and track and measure their holistic impact. The next step is Tier 1 suppliers. These are the suppliers that sell materials, goods, and services directly to the agency or buying organization. Next, we have tier 2 suppliers. These are the suppliers that serve the needs of the tier 1 suppliers. And a best practice is for organizations to require their tier 1 suppliers to actively report their detailed activity with their tier 2 suppliers. And this allows the company to capture key data used to calculate the total impact of their procurement spend. The next level is diversity and sustainability. The combination of procurement dollars with the appropriate supplier diversity, inclusion, and sustainability processes and policies results in measurable results of innovation, quality, and value, which is our next level. The innovation, quality, and value of the new suppliers is the link between global spend and socioeconomic impact in the form of job creation, local community development, and consumer spending. And this all ties together for the House of Responsible Sourcing. So next we will discuss supplier diversity and inclusion defined. The best practice for certification globally is that a business is at least 51% owned, managed, and controlled by one or more individuals from an underutilized group, such as women, ethnic minorities, persons with disabilities, or veterans, my apologies. At We Connect International, we certify women-owned businesses. And it's important to note that only 6 countries outside of the US have definitions for minorities. These countries are Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, South Africa, and the UK. We Connect International offers certification in 50 plus countries and registration in 130 countries, which represents over 70% of the world's population. And we are working proactively to offer certification in Poland, Austria, Italy, Thailand, South Korea, and the UAE.
And I'd like to just add this 51% is really important. It was developed by corporations as a best practice because that's the only way to guarantee that women in our case are actually benefiting by being part of the business.
So next we will discuss bias. Bias can take 2 forms. The first form is conscious or explicit bias, and this is a choice, and you are aware of those attitudes. Then we have unconscious or implicit bias, which is an involuntary reaction, which can be learned from several factors such as parents, friends, colleagues, or society over time. And you may be unaware of the existence of the unconscious or implicit bias. And the truth is that we all are biased, and we cannot be bias-free because we are humans and we are imperfect. However, we can work towards reshaping our thinking by having our efforts, our focus, and courage. Next, we will discuss bias in value chains. So in the world of supplier diversity and inclusion, bias significantly inhibits progress towards gender equality in global value chains. We Connect International did a video with several of our certified women-owned businesses to give examples of the bias that they have experienced. And we will now play this short video for you.
Here's the brutal truth, right? I'm biased, and so are you.
Once I was interrupted in the middle of a presentation by a man who said, "How can you handle this job? You didn't even polish your nails."
We've been told that because we're a women-owned business that we're a risky business.
It's like a club that you're a member, but you're not a member of. It's like you see from the glass, but you're never able to enter that room.
If you're not bringing in the best people who can propel your company forward, you can have an impact on your revenue, an impact on the products, and impact on your client sat.
It's so important that where you buy, where you live, where you work, that you have some representation of yourself.
So as you can see from that video, there are several examples of how women-owned businesses globally are affected by bias. One is the perception that women-owned businesses are less competitive than their male-owned counterparts. And this leads to generalizing, which is the blanket justification against working with all women-owned businesses. And unfortunately, the cycle continues to what is implicit bias, which is backed up by explicit bias, citing selective data or negative experiences that individuals have had with women-owned businesses. And this can be men or women. And so that is why it's so important that we work collectively to make sure that we are mitigating bias within our agencies and organizations.
And just to underscore how important this is, we had an example where a woman business in one of the countries in Asia came to us and said that if she tells the male buyers she's women-owned, they won't buy from her. So this is prevalent in just about every region in the world, some more than others, but it is there, and it is a critical barrier to gender-inclusive sourcing.
So did you know that at least 1/3 of all privately owned businesses in the world are owned by women? Yet women-owned businesses earn less than 1% of large corporate and government spend with suppliers. And globally, women control over 20 trillion in annual consumer spend and make or influence over 85% of consumer purchasing decisions. And a recent Nielsen survey revealed that 66% of global respondents, both women and men, like I mentioned in the first slide, said that they were prepared to pay a premium for products and services from companies that are committed to positive social and environmental impact. And that just ties into what myself and Michael were saying, the importance of making sure that we are mitigating bias, because women are such an important part of the global supply chain. So now we'll discuss the benefits of supplier diversity and inclusion. The first benefit is the reduced procurement costs through increased competition, which is pretty much self-explanatory. Then we have number 2, which is greater supplier availability and resilience. If we learned nothing from the pandemic, we learned that companies that already had a diverse supply chain were able to be more resilient and continue with their operations throughout the pandemic, or at least shortly as things started to slow down. Whereas companies who did not have a diverse supply chain, some of them came to a halt and others actually went out of business. So it's very important to make sure within your agency that you have the diversity of inclusion of diverse suppliers. Then we have number 3, the positive impact as women reinvest and give back to their communities. Number 4, economic development and inclusive growth, leading to new expanding business opportunities. Again, as you open up more opportunities for diverse businesses, that allows there to be more inclusive sourcing throughout, and that leads back to their communities and expands business opportunities, because as we saw in the previous slide, women give back 85%. Then we have number 5, more innovative and adaptability, allowing buyers to better respond to needs. And then finally, number 6, recruiting and the retention of staff. Next, we will discuss public policy best practices. So the first policy is the growing global trend, and that is sourcing from women-owned businesses, and is a key strategy for inclusive economic growth and job creation in countries such as Chile, India, Kenya, the Dominican Republic, South Africa, South Korea, and the United States. And I'll give more specific details about Chile, the Dominican Republic, and South Korea in the upcoming slides. Then we have South Africa. In South Africa, there's the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Codes, also known as BBBEE. And these are a good practice with 20% preferential procurement target with minority groups, which include Black women-owned businesses. And then finally, we have the United States. Most of you may or may not know let me not assume, that the United States is a leader in supplier diversity and inclusion, and this has taken place since the 1950s. The origins of supplier diversity and inclusion go back to the 1950s and the 1960s within the US, when the civil rights movement called for an end to the struggle for justice and equality for Black Americans. Since then, supplier diversity and inclusion has evolved to other diverse categories such as women, veterans, and persons with disabilities. The federal procurement, Now we'll talk about the Dominican Republic and the Chile models. The first is the public online procurement portal, and this helps to improve transparency and simplifies and democratizes public contracting procedures and makes it easier for new suppliers and women-owned SMEs, which is small to medium enterprises, to access tender information. We also have the comprehensive procurement reform strategies, and these are legal frameworks and e-procurement systems that work to help with the capacity building for agencies and women-owned businesses. Then we have business fairs, networking sessions, and training. And these facilitate learning and engagement between government purchasing agencies and women suppliers. Also, for Chile, we have that reform has increased the share of women participating in public procurement by up to 38% in 2018. For the Dominican Republic, the regulation requires government agencies to procure 15% of all goods and services from MSMEs, and that is micro, small, and medium enterprises, and obliges 20% of the percentages from that. And we have a couple more details in regards to Dominican Republic as well. So according to figures from the World Bank Group, the average cost of formalizing a business in Latin America is $652 US. However, in the Dominican Republic, it's less than half at $233 US. And there are almost 1.5 MSMEs in the Dominican Republic, and they represent 98% of the total number of companies and generate up to $2 million jobs that contribute to 38.6% of the nation's GDP. So next we will discuss the South Korea regulations in brief. Many countries around the world, including Korea, have made efforts to improve the transparency and efficiency of public procurement, which accounts for a large portion of their economy. Korea's public procurement system has evolved through much trial and error. And from there, they established the South Korea regulations. These slides briefly go over the 3 articles that deal with gender equality. So Article 1 deals with making sure that there is support for the activities of female-owned businesses and women's establishments of businesses. Article 3 deals with the state and local governments, making sure that they guarantee equality and business opportunities and comprehensive support in the fields of financing, manpower, information, technology, market development, etc. And then finally, we have Article 9, which is the preferential purchases by public institutions, and they have a goal of 5% of the total procurement value of goods and service contracts to be awarded to female-owned small businesses and 3% of the value of construction contracts. So these are the 3 articles that dealt with gender equality from the South Korea regulations. And so now I will pass it back to Michael to discuss how to get started.
Thank you, Brittany. So we have this broken into several steps, number 1 through 5 to begin with. But first and most important is having a policy for gender inclusive sourcing. From a corporate standpoint, it's important to have not just an HR policy on diversity and inclusion, but really include the supply chain. So if you can have something put into writing that in terms of a governance is really official, that can be then shared with the rest of the organization. 2, engage a top senior leader as an executive champion. This is critical for success because it's so important to have this come from the top of the organization and be visible so that everyone understands this is not just somebody within the organization saying it's important. This is the actual leadership of the organization or agency talking about it. 3 is develop a list of resources required to develop and obtain a budget, including one dedicated staff person. Unless there's someone that's really going to be accountable, it's difficult to make significant progress. And this is a best practice in the corporate world, is to having at least one or even several individuals that are responsible for starting, training, education, tracking, measurement, setting goals, and being the resource internally to help the organization achieve their objectives with gender inclusive sourcing. Number 4 is formalize a clear business case, something that is easy to understand that is being communicated, the impact to the communities, the number of women businesses that represent your constituents within those agencies and organization. So it's really important to have this and publicize it so that the community understands that this is really a critical element for your objectives. And then number 5 is develop internal communications plan. So it's important to have everyone in the organization engaged. And part of that happens with communication. So again, coming back to the business case, the policy, wrapping it up by having this communication go out to all those individuals that have an influence in terms of how decisions are made when it comes to the buying and through the supply chain opportunities. So step number 6 is communicate, educate, and engage all relevant government stakeholders that will directly support supplier diversity and inclusion. And this is really critical because it's not only procurement, it's other parts of the organization that may not have set up through procurement. It could be communications, it could be IT or technology, it could be marketing, it could be different groups, again, that are not really focused through procurement. So it's really key to be successful is to have it be enterprise-wide. Number 7 is identify existing diverse suppliers already in the value chain. In our experience, everyone we've worked with has been surprised at the number of women businesses that they found that they're already using in their systems. So the first step is to work with us as an organization or do it on your own to identify women businesses already in the supply chain and seek opportunities in how you can grow that relationship. Determine current diverse spend baseline and establish objectives. So if sometimes corporations, in our case, will not be sure where they're at, and they'll say, well, wherever we are, we'll double it in the next 5 years. Others will take a more sustained approach and look at exactly where they are before they decide what they're going to commit to. And I will have a great example from the World Bank a little later, but it is important to measure and track the objectives and your progress. 9 is set up a dedicated supplier diversity and inclusion page on the website with a code of conduct. Let your constituents know that you're serious about this and give them a way for them to reach out to you if they are interested in being a vendor or supplier to your agency or government. There are plenty of great examples out there, which we can get into later, but we're happy to be a resource to help you understand. But there are companies like Sodexo and Marriott International, for example, that have a dedicated supplier diversity page that explains what they buy, how they buy, and where to go if you're interested in being a supplier. And then 10, develop a process for the review of the diverse suppliers with a tracking system that can flag those diverse suppliers. A best practice, again, is having your accounts payable system have a flag so that you can actually identify your women-owned businesses in our case. That way you can run reports and track the business spend from year to year and measure against your objectives. But it's important also to have a process in place that when somebody does say they're going to want to do business with you as a potential woman-owned business, that somebody looks at that and gets back to them. That has been problematic in some cases where no one ever gets back. You have an organization that says, we're very serious about buying from women, go here and register, and then they never hear anything back. And that creates more negative goodwill than if you don't do anything. So it is really important, if you are serious about setting up a process, have it monitored, watch it on a regular basis, and respond to the women businesses that may or may not be potential suppliers. And there's nothing wrong with saying, thank you, but we don't have an opportunity for your type of product or service. At least someone gets back to them. So that is really a key for success as well. So we have a code of conduct template that's on our website. The link is at the bottom. But this was developed by the Royal Bank of Scotland and supported by We Connect International. It creates a statement of intent strategic aims within procurement, definitions of what diverse suppliers are, a scope, as well as guiding principles. So it's a wonderful best practice that a number of our members have adopted from the Royal Bank of Scotland. So did you know the Hackett Group, which is a research organization, they covered 100 large global companies and found that they dedicated 7.2% of their spending to diverse-owned businesses. This is global. By 2025, companies project more than 50% of an increase in their diversity spend goals. 36% of procurement policies demand the inclusion of at least one diverse supplier in each sourcing event. And this is really key as well. That is one way to mitigate bias that exists by having any opportunity that goes out in the world as an RFP to be inclusive of at least one diverse supplier, or at least one women-owned business through the process. Now, just to underscore this whole piece of supplier diversity, the women businesses have to be competitive in quality, service, and price. Nobody's going to do business with a women business just because they're women-owned. However, when they are competitive and they have that impact that you get by buying from a women-owned business, they'll support their communities more than other groups. And information on the bottom is for the Hackett Group report, which has some wonderful information. So what's next? Brittany?
Thank you, Michael. So now we'll discuss the steps of what's next. So step number 1, develop internal training materials to educate colleagues and new hires. Like Michael mentioned before, and how to get started, it's very important that you're communicating to the other offices or the other departments so that holistically, enterprise-wide, everyone understands the importance of supplier diversity and inclusion. Also, they understand what is bias, and they're more intentional to make sure that they're not leaning in or feeding into their own implicit bias. So that's very important as well. And so you want to make sure that you develop these internal training materials and make sure that as you're hiring new professionals within your organization or your agency, that they are going through this training and they understand exactly what the business case is for supplier diversity and inclusion. And also they understand what bias is and how your organization is working to mitigate against that. Next, we have number 2, which is to form a supplier diversity and inclusion committee or council with senior leaders from each group. Again, this ties back into making sure that your efforts are enterprise-wide. If you have representation from all of the different departments throughout your agency or your organization, then it helps to make sure that everyone not only understands what your efforts are and what your goals are in regards to supplier diversity and inclusion, but in addition to that, they're also invested. You'll find more change and you'll find more impact when you have more parties who are actually invested in the work that you're doing. Next, we have number 3, which Michael mentioned, which is adopt the rule of 1. And this is to make sure you include at least one diverse supplier for all RFPs. And what a lot of companies do in addition to the rule of 1 is they make sure if you do not include, for some reason, if you do not include a diverse supplier, then it has to be signed off by a CPO or another executive from the procurement team, so that you are justifying the reason why you're not including that one diverse supplier. And then number 4 is for RFP opportunities, use supplier diversity and inclusion organization databases to find diverse suppliers, such as We Connect International's We Community. We Community is our global database that is available in 10 different languages, and we currently have almost 16,000 women-owned businesses in that database. And it's an excellent tool to utilize when you're trying to identify women-owned businesses for your upcoming RFPs. But again, other organizations have similar databases as well, but We Community is definitely the go-to global database. So step number 5, for a group of current RFPs, meet the agency sessions. And these are also known as pre-bid meetings. And the importance of these meetings is for transparency and to make sure that you are making the process as fair as possible across the board. So it gives potential suppliers the opportunity to ask any questions that they may have to the agency, and also to fully understand what are the requirements of the RFP. Additionally, it gives the agency or the organization the opportunity to explain what the requirements are, where this is coming from, and then often sometimes to also explain maybe not who the incumbent is, but what exactly the incumbent is working on. So it gives them a better understanding of what they should be proposing when they submit their proposals for the RFP. Next, we have step number 6, and this is to review existing liability insurance requirements and to make sure that they are too high, that you make exceptions for diverse suppliers. Typically in the US, the threshold is $5 million. And again, sometimes this can be a large amount for diverse suppliers. So just make sure when there is an opportunity to make exceptions for diverse suppliers, that your agency and organization takes advantage of those opportunities. Step 7 is to review existing vendor payment terms, and if they're over 30 days, consider lowering them for diverse suppliers. This ties back into number 6. Again, you're just trying to make sure that you're making the process as fair as possible across the board. Then we have number 8, participate in supplier diversity and inclusion events. We Connect International specifically, we have several regional conferences that we do each year that not only allow you to connect with women-owned businesses from around the globe, but it also allows you to tap into what is going on in those different regions from an agency or government perspective as well. So you definitely want to make sure that you're participating in events of that nature. We also offer to our member buyers the opportunity to do what is called Meet the Member events. And these are opportunities for the women-owned businesses to pitch their capabilities to the member buyers in regards to upcoming products and services that they may be procuring. And then finally, we have our annual International Day. And International Day is the event where we bring together our whole entire global team, whether it be virtual or in person. And again, it's a great opportunity to network with the women-owned businesses and really make some connections to add them potentially to your supply chains. Then finally, we have step number 9. And that's to engage prime suppliers with inclusive sourcing efforts. Now we'll talk about the strategies for identifying diverse suppliers. So the process is, of course, you develop the RFI or the RFP. Then from there, you do the supplier selection, and then you evaluate the process as usual. Well, under the 3rd step of supplier selection, you want to make sure that you're identifying and including diverse suppliers in the process. And there are several ways to do that. The first way is to network leads from partners and suppliers. Make sure that you're reaching out to your networks and that you're finding out about potential places, events, and databases where you can identify diverse suppliers. Next is to interact and reach out to your existing diverse suppliers to see if they have the capacity for more work, and also to see if they have additional capabilities that your organization or agency may not currently be taking advantage of. The third option is We Connect International and other organizations. Again, organizations such as We Connect International, we already have existing networks and the infrastructure to connect you to diverse businesses. So definitely utilize organizations such as We Connect International to make those connections with diverse suppliers, women-owned specifically for We Connect International. And then finally, the supplier registration portal. And Michael talked about that when he went through the process of how to get started. Make sure you have a supplier registration portal. And this does not have to be a very expensive system that you put in place. This can start out as an Excel worksheet. This can start out with, again, like Michael said, making sure that you have flags in place for your accounting procedures already in place. So this does not have to be a very expensive undertaking for your organization and your agency. However, it is helpful because it allows you to not only, it allows you to do the outreach proactively and invite diverse suppliers into your network and you already have their information. So it's a way to be proactive in the process. And then from there, you can share with them upcoming RFPs, RFIs, and anything else that you would like to include them in regards to your procurement practices. So next we'll discuss the challenges for public procurement agencies. So the first challenge is the sourcing strategy versus supplier diversity efforts. This is often a challenge because the sourcing strategy is based on lowest cost, whereas the supplier diversity effort is based on best value. And so oftentimes within agencies, there is conflict because the practitioners are taught and trained, quite frankly, to focus on lowest cost. Whereas you can still, like we discussed in the benefits of supplier diversity and inclusion during previous slides, you still can have the lowest cost with supplier diversity and inclusion efforts. But really what you want for your agency is best value overall. Next, we have the buy-in from agency leaders and procurement staff. And that ties into the first challenge of sourcing strategy versus supplier diversity efforts. Again, oftentimes oftentimes the leaders of these agencies are focused on lowest cost, and that is their main priority. And it may not, the practices of supplier diversity and inclusion may not be tied into their KPIs, although that is definitely a best practice. And so it's important to make sure that the agency leaders and procurement staff understand the importance of supplier diversity and inclusion, as well as the business case for supplier diversity and inclusion. And that goes back to the steps that I discussed, making sure you have those training programs in place, not only for enterprise-wide, but also for new hires as well as they come in. So everyone understands what is important for the agency and why there is the push and the incentive to make sure that you are including diverse suppliers in your procurement processes. And then finally, finding diverse suppliers that match your needs. This is so important, and this is why it's important to have either an individual who is focused on outreach or have a process within your procurement department for outreach. Because if you're proactively going out into your neighborhoods and to the networking events that I discussed previously, if you are doing that, then you are already identifying potential diverse suppliers, and that you do not have to work backwards to identify them once the RFP is already live within your agency. So definitely make sure that you have some sort of outreach, whether that is through procurement, a supplier diversity office, or even your communications department. But it's so important to make sure that you are actively and proactively going out and identifying and recruiting diverse suppliers. So next, we'll talk about the challenges for diverse-owned businesses. So this is the other side. So for diverse-owned businesses, oftentimes the public procurement experience can be a challenge. And that is because oftentimes it is a lot longer and requires a lot more paperwork. And again, like we talked about, the payment terms and the payment terms, as well as the liability coverage. So it's just very important, again, that you have these meet the agency or pre-bid events, so that you're being completely transparent with your diverse owned businesses, that they understand the process, and that there's someone within your agency or organization who can explain to them what the process is from A to Z and how they should interface with your procurement team. Next, we have the extended payment terms, which we already discussed, but I will touch on it a little bit more. This can often be a challenge for diverse-owned businesses because with the payment terms, if they're over 30 days, oftentimes diverse businesses do not have the same access to capital that some of your larger non-diverse businesses would have. So again, when you do have the option to decrease those payment terms to 30 days, that is a great best practice to do, especially if you're trying to be inclusive to diverse-owned businesses. Next, we have long contracts needing legal support, and this ties into that public procurement experience. Make sure you have someone on on staff within your procurement team or your supplier diversity team who can assist them with understanding these legal terms. And then also have resources on your website that you can share with them externally where they can get additional legal support as well for the contracts. Then we have insurance coverage requirements. Again, we discussed that within the US, typically the threshold is $5 million. When applicable, it is a best practice to lower those insurance coverage requirements for diverse-owned businesses to even the playing field and give them more of an opportunity to compete. Again, we're not advocating for you to give contracts to diverse-owned businesses. We're advocating for you to allow them to be competitive and compete against non-diverse owned businesses because they are competitive in price and offerings. And then finally, access to capital and resources. And we've touched on that in many ways, but just be mindful that oftentimes diverse owned businesses are not able to access finance the same way that non-diverse businesses are. And so you want to make sure, similar to the legal support, that you have practitioners in place who can assist with this. And then also that you have resources listed on your website externally where they can receive more support with having more access to capital and resources. And so now Michael will talk about the long-term planning.
Great, thank you, Brittany. So in terms of steps for long-term planning, establish a quarterly internal reporting of supplier diversity and inclusion performance. This is really key, as I alluded to earlier, is tracking and measurement is really key, and accountability. Number 2, review goals and performance annually and update goals as needed. It's great to have your first goal to be public and share what your objectives are with everyone in the community. And it also requires some management along the way. If you are way behind what your goals are, that might require more efforts. So you're not surprised at the end of the year that you're not making your goal. On the other hand, if you're exceeding your goal, you may want to change your objective and make that public, saying we've already achieved our initial goal. This is what we're doing next. Number 3 is move beyond procurement department for government-wide engagement. As I mentioned earlier, this is about enterprise-wide. So it's not just strictly related to what procurement buys, but the whole organization. Number 4 is develop and implement internal recognition, a program to recognize high internal contributors and external recognition efforts to top suppliers. This is a best practice among many corporations to incentivize and reward those individuals within the company or an organization that are doing great work, and so that they can show that against their peers. But it's also wonderful to share information on the top suppliers and how they've been able to save money and improve processes, et cetera. And the fact that they're diverse owned just adds to that benefit. Number 5 is consider establishing a mentoring or diverse supplier development program. This helps not only the diverse supplier in our case, but it also helps the individuals within your organization grow and develop their skill sets, whether it's marketing, accounting and finance, personnel, HR. There are opportunities where these women businesses that are ready to grow to that next level can certainly use that support and mentoring to help them be more successful. And it gives back to their community as well as helps enrich the experience of the people on your staff. And number 6, include performance metrics and key personnel annual reviews. In the business world and corporations, this is one of the key drivers. So when the senior executives have performance objectives in their goals and their bonuses are tied to it, they really make sure that that gets cascaded down throughout the organization, that everyone that reports up to them also has those similar goals in effect and are also being held accountable for success. So we have a success story here on public procurement and the World Bank. More than they doubled the share of corporate procurement with women-owned businesses is what they came up with initially. They were just over 3%. They said we wanted to be at 7% by 2023. And I'm happy to share there on the bottom, by the end of 21, nearly 5% of our corporate procurement dollars are going towards women-owned businesses, and 4% is going to minority-owned businesses in the US. So they are now setting another goal to increase that by the end of 2025, which is at 8%. So it's just interesting to watch. They've done this work and they've been exemplary in terms of what they were able to accomplish. And this is just one example of a great success story. We have a number of these other successes and commitments that have been made on our website under WeConnectInternational.org. Next, we want to talk about how to engage, the final part. So as an organization, we provide this as a member-led group. We provide best practices, research, resources to help our members be successful. So as we talked about, we have a global database of over 15,000 women businesses. We do supplier matching, help our members find the women businesses for specific opportunities. We have a best practices library, which a lot of that information is public on our website. We always look for those best practices to share with one another as a community of organizations that are big buying organizations. We individualize, customize supplier diversity and inclusion support and education. We're always happy, even for anyone around the world, whether they're members or not, to do an education series about what is supplier diversity and inclusion and how can you benefit by being inclusive in your supply chains. We do annual benchmarking reports on a regular basis. We've recently launched this top 10 global champions, which we announce every year to reward and recognize those companies that are doing the best of the best. In terms of inclusive sourcing, we do regular global updates as well as regional updates for our members and sharing best practices. And we do training and education of staff. So these are just some of the benefits that come along with membership. And we're happy to share more information if you have any questions. So that's it for today's presentation. I'm sure you'll receive a soft copy of this presentation. We're more than excited to share additional information with you if you have any questions or to do presentations to you and your teams. Thank you very much for your interest and opportunity to share this great information with all of you. Thank you.